A high-pitched whine. The sterile-grade air filtration system screamed as red contamination alerts bled across every panel. Delegate Zurus writhed on the floor, his translucent green membrane sealed, gill slits clamped shut. In the center, Declan Moray held a cloth to his red nose. He looked confused. The scanner flashed. Biological matter detected. 40,000 particles. Velocity 150 kilometers per hour. Join us as we uncover the deadliest weapon in the human arsenal, their own immune system, which made no sense. 40 minutes earlier, the biggest crisis junior trainee Olketh faced was aligning her ceremonial data stylus next to a folded, sterilized cloth. She had politely handed that fabric to the human when he mentioned his stuffy nose. The diplomatic meeting was a routine trade language calibration. Declan was simply a cultural liaison filling in for the absent human representative. The station librarian had volunteered primarily because he liked to read. Pressurized to strict Fenari standards, the chamber featured aggressively sterile air, controlled humidity, and zero biological contaminants. Declan sat between the towering delegates, taking notes on a paper pad. Olketh, observing from the junior gallery, noticed him rubbing the center of his face. His eyes were watering. Her datapad translated this as a possible human emotional response. She documented his deep sentiment toward the trade tariffs, entirely unaware his nasal cavity was currently staging a violent rebellion against the utterly dry, sterile atmosphere. But the human anatomy does not tolerate irritation quietly. Olketh tapped her stylus, pulling up a background physiological scan of the librarian to ensure his emotional state was stable. The database fed her raw, terrifying numbers regarding human sternutation and sneeze velocity. It described an involuntary immune expulsion mechanism. When foreign irritants or dry air affected their mucous membrane, the body reacted with catastrophic force. A single event could generate an aerosol contamination zone of staggering proportions, filling the room with expelled particles. The file listed a bacterial payload of over 700 species, and worse, these microscopic lifeforms were completely non-pathogenic to the host. They carried biological weapons in their faces, utterly unharmed by their own cargo. What would you do if a walking biological weapon sat next to you at a negotiation table? Olketh thought it was a theoretical warning. The hum of the climate controls purred steadily. The Fenari prided themselves on cleanliness, treating every surface with antimicrobial sealants. Yet the fleshy mammal sitting at the central table was a walking bioreactor. Declan's breathing grew ragged. The wet, hitching sound disrupted the calm diplomatic drone of Zurus's trade proposals. Olketh watched the librarian's thick auburn beard twitch. The physical mechanics of the impending biological projectile were winding up like a primitive siege engine. The librarian looked uncomfortable. He picked up the sterilized cloth she had given him earlier, keeping it near his chin. The Palathi trade envoy Zurus was speaking. Zurus possessed a hydrostatic body, lacking a skeletal structure, supported entirely by fluid pressure beneath his translucent green skin. Because his species absorbed moisture directly through their dermal layers, they were exceptionally sensitive to environmental shifts, a vulnerability they were about to discover firsthand. Declan took a sharp, sudden breath. The air pressure in the room shifted. Olketh leaned forward, her stylus pausing mid-click. The human's chest expanded to a terrifying degree. His eyes squeezed shut. He brought the cloth up to his face, but the gesture was entirely inadequate for the catastrophic release about to occur. The librarian leaned forward. The sudden intake of oxygen defied the chamber's carefully regulated atmospheric pressure. Olketh watched his chest cavity expand against the fabric of his uniform, which meant the warning protocols were entirely useless now. He buried his lower face into the small, sterilized cloth she had provided. It was a futile gesture. The sound shattered the diplomatic drone of the trade negotiations. A wet, concussive crack echoed off the polished acoustic paneling. Invisible to the naked eye, a cloud of moisture, dead epithelial cells, and living bacteria ripped through the sterile-grade air. The microscopic payload expanded outward in a violent, 8-meter dispersal radius. The sheer velocity of the expulsion registered at over 150 kilometers per hour. The Fenari filtration system, designed exclusively to scrub targeted chemical warfare agents, choked on the sheer volume of organic debris. And now, under the pulsing red emergency strobes, the true devastation of that single exhalation became undeniably clear. Zurus thrashed on the polished floor, his translucent green membrane reacting violently to the sudden coating of alien enzymes. The Palathi envoy's skin absorbed the moisture instantly, forcing his hydrostatic body into defensive shock. Two other delegates remained plastered against the far wall, their breathing tubes sealed in absolute terror. Declan lowered the cloth. He rubbed his reddened nose. He looked down at Zurus, then around at the screaming control panels with genuine bewilderment. Arbiter DeSeca's voice crackled over the emergency comms channel, his tone laced with fastidious panic. What was that biological discharge? Identify the weapon immediately. Declan dabbed his nose again. A sneeze. He sniffed, his thick auburn beard shifting. Happens when dust gets in. Totally normal. Normal. Olketh stared at the particulate scanner. It locked at over 40,000 foreign droplets. 3 distinct species were currently filing biological attack reports. The human was not ill. He was not hostile. His body had simply expelled an aerosolized biological shotgun blast because the ambient humidity was slightly low. She had studied human history, marveling at their resilience and their ability to survive kinetic bombardments. Now she understood why. Their own bodies were chaotic engines of destruction, constantly shedding microscopic hazards. To humanity, this violent, uncontrollable eruption of foreign genetic material was a minor inconvenience that warranted nothing more than a polite apology. It was this exact casual disregard for their own lethal biology that made them so utterly terrifying. Olketh pressed down on her ceremonial data stylus. It snapped cleanly in half. The diplomatic chamber remained permanently sealed for deep decontamination. Through the thick observation window, the sterilized cloth sat alone on the central table, secured behind a heavy quarantine field. A hazardous materials team had labeled the neatly folded fabric as a level 4 biological threat. Out in the quiet hallway, entirely unbothered by the chaos, Declan sat on a bench and read his book. Olketh approached him slowly, the pieces of her broken stylus clutched in her trembling hands. You require sustenance after involuntarily weaponizing your respiratory tract? Declan looked up from his page, rubbing his stomach. Yeah, burns a surprising number of calories, actually. So, about that cafeteria? Tomorrow, we will examine what happens when a human decides to pet a known apex predator. You will not want to miss the incident report.